let's all rise and say the pledge.
I'm sure we can do that. We got a flag here. We got a flag. Hey, here's Wendy.
I pledge allegiance
Allegiance to the flag
of the
of the
United States
United
of
States.
America,
Okay.
and to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Could we have the roll call, please?
Yes. Mrs. Fryrick,
Here.
Mr. Posnell,
Here?
Mr. Robinson,
Here.
Mr. Sanders,
Here.
Mr. Scalette,
Here.
Mrs. Schrader,
Here.
Mr. Sears,
Here.
Mr. Sullivan,
Here.
Mr. Tillman.
Here.
Okay, thank you. Please silence your cell phones and mute yourself unless you've got something to say. And do we have any public comment yet?
Yes, we do have some public comments, and Wendy will put them up here directly.
All right, thank you.
The link is also available in the agenda, so you can read it at your leisure. Some of them are a bit long. Are each of you able to pull that up on your end? I know Wendy's scrolling through it pretty quick. I'll be honest, I can't read it that quickly.
I can't read it that quickly. This is Joel. I did pull it up.
But there is a link right in the agenda to it if.
Okay, everybody had a chance to look? All right, so I guess we'll move on. The board met in executive session in a virtual meeting format prior to this meeting as permitted by Section 707 of the Sunshine Act for the purpose of discussing matters of personnel. No official action was taken. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Williams.
Guess it would help if I unmuted myself. We just have two plans that we have to approve. One is the what the PD is calling an athletics plan. We're calling an extracurricular plan because we wanted to cover more than just athletics. And the other is a health and safety plan for face-to-face instruction, in-person instruction. Tonight's meeting is centered on the extracurricular plan and how we're going to go about mitigating COVID-19 when we have extracurriculars. Dr. Krauser's been working really hard on both plans, and tonight he has with him Mr. Marshall, who will help discuss the components of the extracurricular plan. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Krauser and Mr. Marshall.
Good evening, everybody. If you give me a thumbs up to make sure you hear us okay. Fantastic. We are practicing some social distancing here, but we thought it might be easier for this process to unfold where we were together in one location. So what I'm going to do is share my screen to kind of walk through a presentation. As all of you have already been shared, as well as been posted into the community, is both the planning document and the summary document. As Dr. Williams mentioned, the state of Pennsylvania is requiring school districts and local education associations to LEAs, local education groups, to post 2 particular safety plans, one specific to athletics, which we included as both athletics and our extracurricular activities, and our district-wide health and safety plan, which will have another exciting night of that next week when we share. But our focus this evening is the athletic and extracurricular activity. So I did ask Mr. Marshall to join me in case we have some more specific questions with that plan. I want to kind of start off by just giving a shout out in particular to Mr. Marshall, Dr. Adams, and Dr. Ellis. Mr. Marshall and Dr. Adams in particular have been very diligent in this process, both communicating locally in the county and across the county, as well as the 4 of us communicating almost on a daily basis to confirm the updates of this plan. As I've been saying to most individuals, there was a time in schools when we often talked about the 2-month planning sequence. I think most of you know that's really now a 2-week planning sequence. Information is changing at a very fast rate, and we want to make sure that we're receiving that information to be appropriate to the planning and safety of our students. So with that being said, I'm going to kind of get things off. The first thing that we did as a group was we made some guiding principles of where we decided that we wanted to go. And at the heart of this was to, with athletics and extracurriculars as a whole, we believe fully that they provide opportunities beyond the classroom and the academic program that are super important for our students. But to make sure those become a reality, we want to do it in a COVID-19 age, that they are safe for both the adults that are involved as well as the students. And the state does require the athletics end, but we felt it was important to include extracurriculars because, in our opinion, they're equally important. Both the robust opportunities through extracurriculars in the arts and the music programs are just as important as they are in the athletics. So you can see there that we set this to establish ourselves to use the most up-to-date research and guidance that we can from CDC, the PA Department of Health, Governor's Office, et cetera, to keep ourselves in a driving position to do what's best for all of our students through the coming summer and into the school year. So a couple quick items about logistics of what the state of Pennsylvania requires. The plan requires certain points that need to be addressed and approved by the school board. The first one was a plan point of contact. In particular, this plan will be Mr. Marshall, our athletic director. He's kind of a frontline leader in that process. So that's who the plan communicates with, as well as the programs that unfold throughout the course of this school year and moving forward. Then we move through a series of sections of the plan. As you can see, there are facilities and cleaning and sanitizing, social distancing, and then of course the monitoring of our student athletes and our staff. And then we're looking at beyond that other considerations. Then we have a responsibility both to professionally develop the staff and the students. And I'm going to kind of talk about that a little bit tonight repeatedly. As an institution of education, we felt through the planning process, which came through loud and clear, is it's an important role to continue to educate the students in healthy hygiene habits and the signs and symptoms of COVID, because that's our first line of communication as the plan moves forward. And then lastly, our communication tactics as the plan unfolds. And then lastly, the part would be for the responsibilities of the board to either adopt this plan and allow it to be implemented after this evening's presentation. So kind of moving forward, I want to talk first about the facilities cleaning and disinfecting and ventilation. And really the first, and again, you have the details, so we just want to kind of talk about the planning and the sequence of why we came to that process. And really, the use of facilities is guided by the schedule piece, and kind of referencing Mr. Marshall as this master of the chessboard, this is an integral part of the plan. Someone who is in complete control and knowledge of all of the activities that are occurring within our fields, within our workout facilities, which in our classrooms. So Mr. Marshall, working closely with the high school administration, allows us to know what's being used at what times so that we can ensure that there's not an overlap and we can properly plan the cleaning, which is number 2, the cleaning procedures and the responsibilities of those involved. So having someone overseeing the schedules is an important part of that facilities, and having Mr. Marshall being that kind of chess master to understand that board is a critical part of that, and that helped unfold the plan. Moving on, occupancy is an important part of that as well. There are 2 stages that we talk about in this plan, both a yellow phase distinction at the state level, as well as the green phase. Occupancy limitations are one, guided by the state with the number of individuals that can get together, but we also wanted to make sure that we are practicing some important social distancing, which we'll get into in a minute. So Mr. Marshall, being in charge of those schedules, can clearly know how many people were involved in what locations, and allows us to make sure that we're making sure that we're keeping our minimum occupancies to ensure that the students are properly socially distancing. Ventilation, as we know from the research, we want to try to increase as much fresh air exchanges as possible. So we had that scheduled both with our cleaning processes, as well as any opportunities that we can have students outside and not in the building is an important part of that. So for example, coming into these summer workouts, we're restricting a lot of the indoor usage to ensure that we're getting them outside and moving in that process as they move forward. Example to that is locker rooms. Going into the summer, the locker rooms are closed and the bathrooms are being used as a 1-in, 1-out process. As we transition into the school year, we'll investigate other opportunities and restrictions as deemed by the district health and safety plan. Some of that usage will also come as PIAA and the local York County Association provides some guidance with those. The student district and equipment, the current plan is kind of, number 1, ensuring that we have cleaning processes for all of those pieces of equipment, but we're also limiting the use of what we're sharing. I'll use an example as water bottles. To start this off, we're having students bring their own water bottles to eliminate the use of potential sharing. All the watering fountains have been disabled and allow that plan to move forward. Moving along, we start now talking about our social distancing and safety protocols. And again, we come back to that scheduling piece. It's an important part of that. Where Mr. Marshall is monitoring what we're going to conceive to be essential personnel versus non-essential personnel. At this point in the plan, everybody is essential personnel. That means the staff are employed by the district as coaches or staff that are on site, and the students that have signed up. Non-essential personnel at this point are not being involved. The state guidelines moving forward, and I say non-essential because the question has been coming up quite about regarding contestants and fans. At this point, there hasn't been a determination on that. It still falls under the 250 member gathering where we are in the green phase. So currently, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Marshall, PIAA has not made decisions on where we're going to be with contestants and fans. We hope to hear some information in short time, correct?
Yes, that's correct. At this point, spectators and vendors most likely would not be attending, but the PIAA has consistently said that they're going to update as we get further into July and August on those matters.
So the social distancing part at this point allows us to have a greater control of that with our own essential personnel. A couple big items there. We'll also really focus on the communal spaces and limiting who's visiting those larger areas. Again, locker rooms is a perfect example of that, as well as our staging areas. Signage is an important part of the process because that works both with the communication end as well as the education end. We want to make sure we are providing signage for both what it means for signs and symptoms, but we're also providing signage to help students and personnel know where they're moving into what directions. Masks, face coverings, as you can saw most recently from the governor's order, we are requiring all staff to be wearing masks at all times. Currently under the order from the governor's office, the students are wearing masks in all things except contestant play and or unless they have a medical condition, correct?
Correct. As long as they're not actively engaged, they should be wearing a mask.
So another big part of this education in social distancing and safety is when we think about moving into the school year. Now, again, our summer workouts are much more conditioning and transitioning. They're not competition, they're not scrimmaging, but we are also educating students on alternative celebrations rather than contact, such as high fives, handshakes, discouraging students that would potentially be spitting or otherwise exchanging fluids. And again, that's an educational part of the process as we want to continue to unfold. The workout protocols, again, thinking about the summer, and I'll let Mr. Marshall add a little bit to this. I think this is something that he's been working very hard on, and it's about how we're talking with coaches to change the way that we're pairing and preparing our students. So if you want to just add to that, Mr. Marshall.
Sure. I think the stress here is going to be gradual progression. We're not going to try and jump back into where we might have been last July or a normal July. The key is going to be reacclimation as far as conditioning and fitness levels. We know that students probably haven't had the same activity level that they typically would at this time. So that's going to be a high stress for our coaches to focus on and make sure that we're gradually progressing the students back to that. We're not going to jump into scrimmages or contests against other types of schools or even within our own teams. It's going to be more of a focus on drills and skill development and also fitness levels at the start. And again, we're going to gradually progress as we monitor those situations and see how those goes. But by focusing on drills and skill development, it's going to allow us to adhere to a little bit more social distancing and limiting the contact between players and also the use of equipment.
Yeah. And I'll kind of echo that as we've had the same conversations as we start to transition into the other extracurricular activities, I'll say band, chorus, orchestra, things like that, where we start off where we're getting back into the skills. Students may have not engaged for a certain period of time, and we get into smaller groups, where we can adhere to social distancing. It's not a rush to get back to full performances until we feel confident that we can arrange those things and adhere to the safety of all students involved. Kind of moving along, here comes an important part of this plan because it involves both the staff as well as the students when it comes to monitoring their health. We have implemented daily screening protocols as part of this plan. They're daily on site. And I also want to emphasize, again, coming back to the education, a big part of this plan, as well as the district-wide plan, is in education. I think as all of us have heard when it comes to COVID strategies and mitigation, it's each one of us becoming more aware and more cognizant of our role in what we're doing. So helping students understand their roles of monitoring their own behaviors, monitoring their own signs and symptoms is an important part of that screening process. Daily on site, they'll have an interview process with the coaches to confirm signs and symptoms. But again, that stress that's occurring each and every day as students are engaging outside of the school day, interacting with friends and peers. As they get up in the morning, they're helping start monitoring their own signs and symptoms. In the plan, as you saw, we do have an isolation and return protocol process where we have students immediately removed from that process and allowing us to clean and process where necessary. And then lastly, a communication plan on what that might look like given in a particular process. There is often a uniqueness to each individual incident, and we would handle each one as they come in with regards to a confirmed case versus a student who becomes ill on site. And we'd have to handle each one of those individually. We do have a crisis response team which handles each one of those incidents on site. And then within the rights of the HIPAA, we would communicate accordingly within our legal rights to make sure that we're protecting safety as it continues for the rest of the group. Lastly, we have some considerations beyond that, and I wanted to come back to the facial coverings because that was an important one. Right now, we're operating under the governor's office and the directions for facial coverings. And the other part of that is our higher risk students. As we said in the very beginning, one of our guiding principles was make sure we're providing opportunities for all students to extend beyond their classroom experiences, and we want to make sure we can provide for them. So inside the plan, there are processes in place for students that may have a higher risk, that they can set up times and opportunities they can work with our staff to make sure we can arrange for a proper experience for them as well that would still ensure their health and safety and experience in the events. The last part of the plan is the professional, excuse me, I got one ahead. Is the professional development. And again, I'll compliment Mr. Marshall and his team. He's been working diligently on preparing the education and the professional development retired. So as we've said repeatedly, a big part of this process is educating the students and the athletes about their roles in mitigation as well as being aware of their own signs and symptoms. The coaching binder Mr. Marshall's been working hard on is preparing a fully comprehensive program for the coaches to have to reference what they need to do their education, their signage, their check-ins. Anything else you want to add to that, Mr. Marshall?
No, just essentially that they're going to have everything with them, because we know this is a lot of information, obviously, but those coach binders they're going to have on hand. So they'll have every extra form, screening forms, acknowledgement forms, contact information, the communication plan for them to easily reference. So we'll have that with them at all times while in the facilities.
Yeah. And then lastly is how we're sharing this information out. We're using a lot of our consistent sources that we use, email, social media, communication apps. A lot of coaches and even some of our teachers use communication apps, whether it's an Infinite Campus Messenger, which comes through our internal student information system, or sometimes coaches are using things like Remind or other apps that they would use, as well as our website is an important part of that. And then lastly, the question in particular athletics, as well as I'll say a few of our extracurriculars, is the transition to in-season play. And at this point, what we're doing is a lot of that is dependent upon what's going to unfold with the PIAA. But as you can see, we have a couple items that we're focusing our attention on in that transition, and certainly incorporating what we're applying now, integrating what we're learning from the district-wide plan, and we'll work on what we need to do for transportation. Again, what would be essential personnel versus non-essential personnel. As Mr. Marshall has said, right now PIAA hasn't provided guidance yet on competitors and spectators with regards to those events. Under the current plan and the current advisement from the governor's office, concessions are to operate under the guidance of business and restaurant industry standards. They too have stipulations to apply to, so we have embedded that in this plan. If and maybe when we do open concessions, they will be following a very strict guidelines for those and whatever phase the county is in. And then lastly is, of course, our local York Adams, as well as the PIAA status as we move forward. Another big part of the transition to potential in-season play or potential extracurricular activities of a competition level will be the state color designation and things that come out of the governor's office and certainly the Department of Health as we move forward. So again, the goal for tonight was to provide hopefully some background thinking of two rather large documents. One, of course, was the planning document, as you saw, which kind of took you through the questions that we as a team worked through and collaborated on. And then the last one is the summary of those strategies and actions that we use to implement the plan as we move forward. Mr. Marshall, anything I'm missing?
I think just to reiterate, the communication that's been going out to the coaches and will continue to go out to the community and student athletes is that these are summer workouts. These are certainly voluntary. This isn't something that's mandated. If they do not choose to attend, that's not anything that's going to be held against them. We want everybody to come in at their own comfort level. And if there's any questions or concerns, the message to student athletes and coaches and staff is going to be to stay at home, get further information and guidance prior to coming in and participating in those workouts. But again, it's going to be continually stressed that these are all voluntary workouts.
Yeah. And I think one other important part of that process that we've discovered through this is the plan itself and the work that was used to build it. I keep going back to that concept is education-based. So our signage, our communication continues to educate and support the students' understanding of the signs and symptoms and their roles in the mitigation, as well as the adults involved in both the athletics as well as the extracurriculars. So with that, I'll throw it out to any potential questions.
Hey, Scott, so let's pick on, I don't know, the football team or the band camp or something. So you're in the middle of band camp, a student comes in and reports that he's tested positive or a student tests positive. What's the implication for the rest of the people around him? Do they all get quarantined? Do they have to be tested? And if they have to be tested, who pays?
That's a great question. And where we are now, it depends on, in particular, was that student notifying us? Did they become ill on site? One of the first things in this particular plan for the athletics and extracurriculars is, because it's a volunteer basis, everything's kind of shut down immediately at that point while we investigate and to the best of our ability do as much contact tracing as we can on site. That's kind of where the crisis response team comes in and we investigate that information.
So the whole football team is potentially compromised.
I'm sorry, say that second part again.
So I say that in my example, one student is discovered to be ill, the whole football team is compromised if it's the football team.
Yes, and potentially no. The way that we're building the schedule is we're trying to eliminate as much cross experience as possible. For example, the way that Mr. Marshall and the coaches are working is it might very well that the offense is only practicing in air areas. They might not be interacting with the defense in particular. So there might not be a complete exposure to that particular incident.
So we only lose our offense.
I beg your pardon?
So we only lose our offense.
May very well be, correct.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
Just to add on that, that's where we would utilize our attendance and screening forms as well. So with consulting local health officials, as soon as that would happen, we would go back through and make sure that all those sign-up sheets in the beginning and attendance records that are taken, we will have those recorded, and we'll be able to reference those to see who else was at those workouts and would have potentially been exposed to that person that had a probable case or symptoms.
And there's no expectation that we would do testing or we would pay for testing.
At this point, there is not.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
This is Joel. Kind of a structural question to start, Scott.
Sure.
We're calling this an extracurricular plan
Correct.
because the state said do an athletics plan, and we decided that it made good sense to expand beyond that. Yet, if I'm reading this not knowing that, there's nothing in the specifics that I saw, maybe I missed it, that references anything but athletics. Every example is athletics. There's no mention of band. There's no mention of thon. There's no mention of clubs. There's nothing that seems relative to anything other than athletics. So could you kind of comment on that, please?
Sure. The PDE required process is for an athletics plan, and the template and process that is to be board approved is an athletics plan. What we're using is this planning process and the language and communication to be mirrored into the extracurriculars as well. So the high school administration has been in communication with our band, our chorus, and our orchestra, band camp, things that would begin in the summer to begin laying down these plans for them as well.
So will we see additional information? Or is this it?
This was the PDE state approved the plan. We can, if you would like, we could share the specifics of the communication that we're using with the band, chorus, and orchestra, for example.
I think that would help, especially since this is a community document. The title is misleading relative to what's actually in the document.
Okay.
And along those lines, if we could get a list of what organizations are engaged in activity over the summer. I mean, some of them, band camp, for example, we would be well aware of, but there may be other groups or organizations who would be using this plan with which the board is not familiar. They're involved in summer activities. So,
and this does go beyond summer. This is not a summer plan. This is an extracurricular plan.
Right. So, for example, driver ed is one of these examples.
Brian,
another point, Scott, if I can have a second on this, is some wording choices. I can remember discussions from back in the days when I was on the policy committee about the difference between should and will, may and might. I think policies or procedures, or in this case, documents that guide us need to be a little bit stronger in the terminology. When we say somebody should do something or somebody may do something, that makes it optional. So is that the intent? An example is students and coaches should self-report. Well, what if they don't? Do we need the language to be stronger?
I can share, and Mr. Marshall can add to that. I think the question then comes to be, what is our rights within the consequence end of those things? Similar to, and a lot of conversations similar to policies for students that are ill. You know, if a child is ill, they're not to come to school, or if they're in a fever, they should come to school. How do we enhance that? I think the language is something we can investigate. The next question would be, what's our right to provide consequence to those that may not follow through on those roles? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, in particular staff. If a staff member is supposed to do something and the staff member says, well, you only said I should, you only suggested it. There's no consequence to that.
Mhm.
Yeah, that would be a good thing to do, but you didn't say I had to do it.
I have some thoughts to share as well, and perhaps a few questions. I share, but I want to say, Joel, and everyone, that I share your line of questioning, Joel, and I support that line of inquiry that you're giving us. There's the question of the approval of the document, which I'm prepared to support, and then there are the norms and attitudes that shape what actually happens. So I want to speak to the norms and attitudes of the community, of the York suburban community, for a moment. One is gaining trust that from the top down to the assistant coaches, there's a commitment to bend backwards to adhere to these guidelines. That members of our district need to know that the district is all in from top to bottom with respect to these guidelines. And I have a couple remarks here, and I would appreciate it. Dr. Williams or Mr. Marshall or Dr. Krauser responding to any of this. So a thought is that we need to see the situation in the best light. No one wants to follow rules, but we're in a situation now where it's like a new social contract. There's a set of norms, and these are norms of caring and respect for the reality of our situation. And the last thing we want is for our institution to permit interactions that lead to coaches and students spreading the disease in our community. I take it that the community trusts us, that the district will do right by them and us, which in this case requires, at least in my view, when it comes to applying these guidelines, the opposite of live and let live. It's be careful, be cautious, and considerate. Let us follow and be committed to the guidelines and adjust to the inconveniences that these rules imply with good cheer and understanding. So I'm speaking to the norms beyond just giving the official board approval. So let me give an example. And this might go, Joel, to some of your comments. One thought is, I recommend that coaches be careful to teach our athletes that the screening exercise is not a joke or something dismissible. That leadership is about parents and coaches and students having a sense of the value and importance of doing that screening exercise seriously, so that each time the form is filled out, it's done with seriousness, and that we teach the students to have the courage that if the answer to any of the questions is yes on that form, then they say it and act on it. And that we're in a moment where the coaches can look at their jobs in the most high-minded, teachable ways, that in following these guidelines, we need a concept of a team in and for the safety of our whole community. So those are general normative statements I wanted to share and to get any reaction to. I had specific questions. Now this is a little bit particular to Joel's comments. Like if coaches see the flouting of the rules, some students who just don't want to wear a mask under any circumstance. There's nothing here that provides direct guidance. So what is the guidance to the coaches? What are the coaches being told about maybe particular students who are being resistant? I think it would be good to hear that a little bit. And similarly, if there's activities going on where overall they're not in accord with the guidelines, what will the district do? I'd be interested in hearing a bit about that. And I noticed, as Joel said, there was a couple of language points where there was language that said the district will encourage students to wash their hands if they go in the restroom. That's a pretty weak expression. Or there's an expression that bats and balls should be washed in between play if possible. That it's an interpretive point, but I would hope at a normative level it would be interpreted as the care should be taken unless it's impossible. That's a really strong statement of possibility there, rather than one with wide interpretation. So in any case, so thank you, and I'm interested in any responses or reactions to that.
We can comment on the masks. I know we've been having quite a bit of conversation with that, because the same conversation is coming up with the district level plan and what to do with students and how that links to other policies such as codes of conduct and consequences associated with that. But I'll let Mr. Marshall comment in particular to this athletics plan and the face coverings.
Thank you.
So to start with the face coverings, and this will kind of answer a couple of the questions potentially, but I could not agree more that I think you used the word team. I keep considering this has to be a full circle approach between the coaches, the student athletes, athletic trainers, everybody involved, and even at home for the student athletes and their families. There needs to be transparency and honesty, and the forefront of everybody's mind has to be the greater good. And again, that comes back to if there's any question, if there's any concerns about having symptoms, you need to stay home until you get further clarification on those things. And that has been stressed to our coaches, and they'll continue to stress that, and I'll continue to stress that to them. But it is something they're going to take seriously. And they're the role models, just as always. So they're going to role model that behavior. You know, they're not going to have anything loosely, because we know how that then trickles down to the student athletes. So that will be stressed, and that has been stressed to them. And I have full confidence in them that they will role model the positive behavior that we're looking for. As far as if somebody's not adhering to those rules, that would essentially be treated the same way as isolation in the same day. So they're going to be they're going to be removed from the workout or the activity. They're going to be separated from the other student athletes and staff, because they're obviously not following the protocols that we have in place for them. In turn, they're putting everybody else at risk. So we would remove that athlete from the activity, and they would be follow up with communication that they're not able to return to that until they're ready to adhere to the guidelines. As far as some of the language, and we can certainly make some of those things stronger, I can just somewhat speak to where some of those wordings may have come from. The state has provided planning and guiding documents in response to some of these template questions. And I think some of those basically come directly from those plannings and guidelines, where a lot of times they'll talk about leaving it a little looser in the wording and then enforcing during your coach's training, and then the coaches training the student athletes become a little bit more stricter in that wording maybe than what is already in the planning document. But that's initially where some of that comes from, based on the built-in response forms from the PDE. And Dr. Krauser, if you have anything to add to
That's kind of where the heart of our conversations have been about, you know, what's a guiding document and how we use it to exercise those inside the event or the classroom for that matter.
Dr. Ellis, I didn't forget you. Unmute.
No, I just was going to share very briefly, answer Mr. Schrader's question. There's very little happening on the summertime. Certainly marching band camp is one of those activities. Our sports are certainly going on. That's why that was classified that way. Driver's education. The only other couple that I envision possibly happening, Trojan Theater has been practicing online all summer long in the hopes of being able to do the show that they missed out on in the spring. So we may have them come in. And then additionally, student council is doing some activities just around fundraising or mini-thon. But otherwise, I don't anticipate any other groups really coming in and taking advantage of this purpose. Once the school year is up and running and we'll already have students in our building, some of those protocols will be a little bit different, and we may come back with some specific guidelines for that. But as for summer use, that's the extent of what I've heard from anyone at this point and anything that's ever happened in other summer times.
Good. Thank you very much. Along those lines, is the community going to be allowed then to use the facility? Can there be track walkers? Can, you know, the baseball field be used by a community league? I mean, where do we stand on those kinds of things? I don't know who's going to answer that.
We were just engaging in those conversations. I know Dr. Williams is preparing some communication this week. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Williams, to that particular point.
Actually, Dr. Adams will be sending out an email later this week about some information about when they can use the track again and when they can use the facilities again. Right now, we're in a situation where we're tasked with hygiene tasks for our athletes. And it seems kind of strange to have to go through all those protocols for our athletes, but then say, hey, community, go ahead and use the stuff without precautions. It seems to be a disconnect there. So we don't know yet exactly when they're going to be able to use those facilities the way they had been using them in the past. Because we certainly don't want them using facilities that could intermingle with our athletes and cause potential problems that way. So we don't have an answer yet as to when they'll be able to do that, but they have been. I think maybe Dr. Adams actually sent an email today letting them know some information is coming.
I've been asked about the tennis courts, for example. That's why I bring up the question. Thank
Yeah,
you.
the tennis courts, a track, and the basketball courts. We hear about them a lot.
Unmute, Ellen.
At that. Let's see if I did it. Let's see.
You did it.
Okay, I did. I want to thank Dr. Krauser and Mr. Marshall and Mr. Gerling and all these people to whom these responsibilities are going to fall. And thank you for the work that you have done to get this plan ready. I'm glad to hear that you are concerned about the community, and I'm glad to hear that you are working on the consistency with which we are going to expect these coaches to maintain these standards and to take this questionnaire very seriously every day. And there are some, I would agree, some areas where the wording has not been as strong as I would have liked it to have been. And that means that maybe more responsibility falls on these coaches to each day make sure they are very, very consistent. Now, whether the track coaches or the running coach is consistent as the band leader, I don't know. That will be something that will have to be proven as time passes. Steve Skelet, thank you very much for your comments about, making sure that this is a community kind of pro plan, because we do have to be concerned about the rest of the community and how it impacts once our children start getting together, whether it's in group of 5 or 20. I would suspect the student council is at work, as you said, perhaps at the middle school too, and both the LinkedIn crew at the high school and the middle school, I would assume, for new students. I don't know whether they will fall under this too, which makes it a little bit more difficult. But Steve Skelet, thank you for your thinking and for your comments.
This is Steve Sullivan. I'd like to say first, I appreciate what Steve Skelet said, and I appreciate, Joel, what you said about strengthening the language. This whole thing is going to rise or fall on compliance. I think we know on reflection and our own experience as parents that, and the experiences is related by our kids, that we have students show up sick at school during cold and flu season as a commonplace. That happens all the time. And I would fully expect that at some point somebody is going to send, knowingly or unknowingly, against the backdrop of a flu season starting in October, generally, that we're going to have some challenges of not knowing, who has what. And I think that, the quarantine periods that are dictated by this illness are going to be a drag for anybody with a positive test result or even a presumed positive test result. And so there are going to be burdens that are placed on folks, and no one's going to want to be the person who stands up and says, I got swabbed and it's positive. So we have to encourage people to be candid in coming forward with information like that, because the lives of our faculty and staff and their fellow students might depend on it. So I think the strongest language possible is good. I wanted to throw one more hypothetical at you. I appreciated, John, your hypothetical, because that was really the first question that I had was actually in my horrible hypothetical. It was, say, a strength trainer for the football team.
Yeah.
Right. A high contact individual. I think I heard you intimate, if not say, that you are prepared within the 4 corners of this document to quarantine everybody if it comes to that.
Correct.
So, so that we're not going to be splitting hairs about who might or might have not have, if it was just special teams, or if it was a high contact individual, then anybody who had contact with them is going to get quarantined. Okay. So a gloss on that, if I might. So let's say on 11 September this year, we play York Catholic. Let's say we hear the Tuesday, or it is the case that the Tuesday following that Friday night game, Catholic quarantines its entire football team because of a case of a coach or a player or a parent or something like that. 1, how would you find out? And 2, who would get quarantined on our side?
I'll take that a little bit. Just as a lot of the focus right now has been on those summer workouts, some of those things, I'm also on the return committee for the YAIAA. So some of those discussions have been but they're still pretty preliminary. I can say that all of the league schools are in contact frequently. So that's something that York Catholic would certainly inform us if they had one of those instances. And then again, we would go back through our contact tracing and contacting local health officials and following their guidance as to who would have to be quarantined for us after we get that necessary information from York Catholic as well. We would work with them. We would work with the local health officials to determine who would then need to be quarantined on our end. But I can say that there's frequent communication throughout the league as far as they would follow up with us immediately in that type of instance.
Thank you.
Mike, if I understood that, that's essentially a practice. It's not something that's subject to the policy or to the plan. It's just good practice. That's what I'm hearing.
It's good practice, but it may also get to the point, I believe, where the league is heading, that they're going to put some mandates and consistency protocols in place where schools would have to follow those guidelines once we get to that point in the season. If we're able to have contests, then there's going to be certain things that are going to be required from league opponents where that would all be broken down, and the processes and the steps to how that would be followed up would all be laid out for league schools to follow.
Yeah, I can see it like a gigantic set of dominoes coming down.
Right.
Both time and space. I have a question that's a kind of a structural one.
Sure.
And maybe it's more of an observation. I know you've put a tremendous amount of time and thought into this plan, and I really appreciate that. I know my fellow board members feel the same way. What I would also suggest is that we again are caught in a position where 500 individual school boards are required to do these things at enormous cost. We may not write a check for it, but everybody that spends time and effort on this is expending resource that would otherwise be directed to academics or some other pursuit. So here are a couple questions. One, did you collaborate with anybody else in the county so that we have common approaches? Second, what is it about suburban that's unique? And I'm going to ask that primarily so I can deal with our legislators. I don't read anything in this plan that's unique to suburban. I think they're wonderful practices, but I can't see anything that's uniquely York suburban. Can you?
Well, I'll let Mr. Marshall comment first on the collaboration, because I can assure you that that's been happening. I'll say both administratively. I've been communicating with other administrators, and I know Mr. Marshall, go ahead and comment on your collaboration levels.
Yeah, that's something where we've been in touch frequently. There's been plenty of Zoom meetings. I can tell you as a league, we've spent a ton of time just in collaboration with different athletic directors. So a lot of the plans really do mirror each other. Again, I think somebody referenced consistency before. That's certainly something that we're striving for. And then also just from the collaboration piece, really everyone's building these plans based off the same documents that have been released from the state, information that's come out from the PIAA and other governing bodies. But that has been, frequent communication in planning, and then also following up with some of those schools that have already started to get information from them on how things are going, any situations that have occurred that they have had to deal with, or anything that they would have done differently during those instances. So that's something that's happened quite a bit and will continue to happen.
Yeah. A naive person might question why the state's not doing this as opposed to all the individual school boards. But that's just an observation. You don't have to respond.
I would like to just comment on, I think the conversation that was circling quite a bit with regards to the norms, and as Dr. Scalette had mentioned and kind of followed up with a few other board members, with regards to that example, whether it's the York Catholic or the football game. And that's the part that's happening right now with Mr. Marshall and his coaches about developing those norms, that the process of the athletic winning and losing, shall we say, is not, that the primary part of this is everyone's health and safety, and establishing those norms early on so that students, and I would agree with Dr. Sullivan, I think, there are many, many individuals that give their children Tylenol in the morning so that they're fever-free to get in and get to school. That's happening quite a bit. And I know at the planning table in the conversations was a lot of conversation about how do we help to educate to say that inevitably that's not the best for the team and the center of this circle. Inevitably we're kind of not benefiting everyone. So that's a big part of the focus, and a big part of what Mr. Marshall's been doing with his coaches. as he continues to lead them into setting those norms, as Dr. Scalette had mentioned. With regards to the specifics about how this plan is specifically different, I think Mr. Poe's now kind of led a little bit to that about where the state comes into play. I will say that from just hearing Mr. Marshall and seeing his communication, one of the things that maybe not written on paper is that part, as Dr. Scalette had mentioned, the norms and the communication that Mr. Marshall is having as he builds that underlying foundation of what is the premise of the plan and why we're executing it. I'll kind of look to Mr. Marshall if there's anything specific that he recalls from his colleagues that might separate us out a little bit more differently from the other. We are using a similar planning tool. We are using similar guiding documents. So a lot of the document does tend to lend in similar fashion.
Yes, I wouldn't say there's anything necessarily unique in the plan, just because we've been following the recommendations and the guidelines of those governing bodies and local health officials. The part that I would think of when it comes to unique is just going to be the training and the consistency in communication with our coaches, and just making sure that, you know, our staff, again, is role modeling the positive behavior, setting the tone early. And I would say just the unique part would just be just in the implementation and the consistency and the continuing approach by our coaches to really just set the tone and establish that compliance.
If I may ask a question of Dr. Krauser?
Absolutely, sir.
And this goes back to something that Mr. Sears said about communicating with our good friends in Harrisburg. I'm not sure if you said it, but I heard it when you were commenting early on, that this plan is also presenting an educational opportunity. And what I heard you saying was it's an opportunity to teach students situational awareness. I'm not sure if you said that, but yeah, that's what I'm going to go on a premise that might be unique to Suburban's plan. I'm not sure if it is or not, but I'd be happy to say so to anybody that would listen. Is that accurate?
I think that's absolutely accurate, you know, and I'll say one of the things that, you know, we've heard from other individuals, and sometimes it's geared more towards let's get athletics up and running. And again, I compliment Dr. Adams, Dr. Ellis, and Mr. Marshall. When we began the early conversations, it was all about health and safety, and I didn't use that word directly, but you know I'm a big fan of that word, and that awareness piece is an important part of that, because it comes back to what we talked about with the monitoring. You know, we can have a daily check-in each day, and we can go through the series of questions, but until students start monitoring their own awareness, as do the own adults in our community, and making decisions that's best for themselves and the community as a whole, it's going to be difficult for us to slow the spread and certainly inhibit it from reaching our community once again.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question. I hope that you can hear me.
Yeah.
But I was wondering, because we talked about the consequences that the student athletes would have if they didn't show up wearing a mask or have a mask during the event or practice or whatever. And I was just wondering, what kind of consequences would the coaches have if they're an anti-mask kind of person?
That's the same. If we have any coaches that aren't following our guidelines, they're not going to be participating. And just as we've communicated to student athletes, these are voluntary workouts. This is a situation where it's also voluntary for our coaches. And if they don't have the comfort to start or to return under the guidelines that we're going to put out there through this plan, then that's not something that they need to do. But if they are going to be with us and participate, they're going to need to follow the plan and the guidelines that we put forth. Because again, the plans are in place to keep everybody safe. And if somebody can't adhere to those, then unfortunately they're not going to be able to take part in workouts.
Right. And I would also then add in that's when we remind everybody to Dr. Scolette's comments about the norms, that coaches shouldn't feel pressured to compete. You know, it is a piece where we have to believe that the first point internally, the reason why we're making those decisions are to support one another. And I believe those are the norms that we've kind of been talking a little bit about this evening to do that. But those that don't comply, yeah, they would be asked to be removed as well.
Okay, and so if that coach or none of the coaches can participate, would they just be letting their student athletes know that there's not going to be any summer practices?
There will be communication that comes out from each of the coaches to the programs. Again, just addressing everything that we talk about in here and some of the stress points, but then also start dates and when they plan to return. If there are any coaches that choose to start at a later date, we'll offer some different opportunities for their student athletes to be involved in activities that are safe and fall under the proper guidelines. But they will be in communication with their student athletes as far as the plan for that specific program.
Okay, thank you.
Great questions.
I don't know when these things are set, so I apologize for not having a better sense of the overall tempo of schedule design and all that sort of stuff. Has PIAA made a final determination about whether there is going to be a fall football season?
They have not made a final determination. At this point, the PIAA has put out information that they are planning to go forward as normal. Now, normal obviously is different in these circumstances. They would have to follow the guidelines and the protocols, but they plan to have a scheduled season that would start at the same time as they had listed last year. They would have the same type of postseason events. Now, again, they'll be meeting again on July 15th, and then again also on August 5th. And from the beginning that they put out that they probably won't have any confirmed details or changes. They're going to try and hold off as late as possible to see where the current status and state is with everything surrounding these plans. But at this point, they're planning to move forward with the schedule as was originally indicated.
I will also share that, you know, we've been having these conversations literally every day as it started last week. We are seeing at the collegiate level, the Patriot League, the Ivy League, you know, our Big Ten have limited in play. So literally every day comes new information. So the July 15th is correct. I think July 15th was the next big day. We expect to hear some information.
I might just add for school board members, PSBA every day is very religious about sending out their edition. And in it, they're talking very specifically about what you just talked about with Dr. Lombardi's meetings and things like that. So we might see that even as soon as you do hear from him also, because they are very, very aware of that. That's one of those few times I direct people to the PSBA daily edition that comes out. I think you administrators get that too. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I was stuck in traffic in Lancaster a couple of weeks ago, and I was searching through the PIAA site high and low, including minutes of a meeting that they'd had maybe 2 days prior to my review of the website, and there was no mention at all of when the decision would be occurring or anything like that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, based on PIAA's track record, I don't expect any decision on July 15th. And I expect to be August 5th at the earliest, knowing that the PIAA season officially starts somewhere around the 14th of August. Is that right, Mr. Marshall?
The first date for return would be football has heat acclimation on August 10th, and then all other fall sports would return on August 17th. So, yep.
So August 10th is the first date for football. And so PIAA could wait till August 9th to make that decision. I wouldn't be at all surprised.
If I could just add, Mr. Marshall and Dr. Krauser, my thanks to you for, you know, getting this whole program together, but also to ask if you would please extend to the coaches that you're going to be working with our thanks, because they are taking on an enormous task, and to be brave enough or kind enough, or, you know, throw in your terminology there. But we're grateful that they've taken this task on, and the community's trusting that they're going to make good choices and enforce those choices, because bear in mind, a lot of these kids have been totally sedentary. I mean, we hope not, but we were all teenagers. I'm sure a lot of them have been. So this is a big job that these coaches are taking on, and we're grateful to them for opening the door and going to work with these kids. So thank you.
I think we're questioned out.
Thank you very much.
So Dr. Williams, are you looking for a motion to accept this?
Yes, sir, please.
Okay, could I have a motion to accept this document with the changes recommended?
So moved.
Second.
More discussion?
Can I just ask, are we going to do accept this plan with provision for any of the changes that we might have suggested for stronger language or things like that? Or are we just passing it as it is? This is it?
I think we're passing it as is with a recommendation that as legally as they can, they update or strengthen the language.
Okay, I'm willing to vote for that then.
Okay. Can we do a roll call vote?
Mr. Tillman,
Yes.
Mrs. Schrader,
Yes.
Mr. Posnell,
Yes.
Mr. Sears,
No,
you said no?
correct.
Galette?
Did you say Mr. Scalette?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Mrs. Fryrick,
Yes.
Mr. Sanders,
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan,
Yes.
Mr. Robinson.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Might I suggest that I know the overall health and safety planning document is under development, and I would suspect that many of the same guidelines or feedback regarding the strength of the language shalls rather than shoulds, as I suspect that there are whatever, I'll put quotes around it, deficiencies might have existed, or you know, the strength of the language perhaps not being on the frontier of this document can be addressed somewhat through the higher level document. If you're not in school, you're not participating in these activities.
Yeah, and that's the reason we wanted to do the extracurricular plan first, to flush out those things that maybe we need to nuance and make better for the health and safety plan. Okay, the next item, if I don't have the agenda in front of me right now.
Calendar.
We put on the agenda for this month, for this meeting, to talk about the school calendar. Because we would like to make a couple of modifications due to COVID-19. And initially, we talked about perhaps taking a couple of student days in the beginning of the school year and turning them into Act 80 days for some additional professional development that is necessary under the certain current circumstances. But then we had a different idea about stealing 2 instructional days from Christmas time and turning them into Act 80 days that can be spread out over the school year. Because we have to, what we originally were planning for professional development at the beginning of the year is not what we're going to be doing at the beginning of the year this year for professional development. So we don't want to lose sight of the trauma-informed and all those other kinds of things that we were going to do at the beginning of the school year in the summer. We're going to sprinkle them throughout the school year. Also, what we'd like to do is eliminate early dismissal days, most of them, not the ones for parent conferences, but the other ones, so that we can kind of balance out the Act 80 with the half days or the early dismissals, so that we don't lose any significant instructional time. So that's the gist of what we're doing at the school calendar. I'll turn it over to Dr. Krauser to elaborate in more detail about those.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Williams. Yeah, in particular, as Dr. Williams said, we don't want to lose sight of our original planning. Our 2 flex professional development days at the beginning of the year, which would have been on the 13th to 14th, were flex trauma-informed education, which was follow-up to the work that we did last spring, and then our curriculum work that we've been laying a foundation in the Understanding by Design framework. We don't want to lose sight of that. Our teachers have been engaged and thoroughly for the right reason, certainly because we're investigating what we teach and how we teach in this new age, as well as how we're responding to trauma. So what we would now have to do is we've got, as you just heard from this plan, we have a tremendous amount of professional development that's associated with the health plan, protocols, processes, procedure, the education, the signage, all of those things at a district level, as well as the intricacies at a building level. What does the flow of traffic look like in Indian Rock versus Valley View? So those beginning of the year professional development days now, we'll need one for the professional development of the safety plan, one for the professional development and logistics of quarantining rooms, protocols, and nurses that are building specific is one day. And that leaves us one day necessary for us to professionally develop the staff as we upgrade our forward learning. Next week, when we talk about the plan, we're going to talk about our learning plans. If we end up in a red phase again and we return to forward learning, we know without a doubt there needs to be a substantial upgrade. We're rolling out a forward learning 2.0, which will result in a tremendous amount of rigor and increases in our ability to communicate, grade, and communicate with our students. So that's going to require professional development today. And as Dr. Williams said, that's why the important part of that beginning of the year has now changed. And then, as he said, with the half days, to recoup that time right before Christmas would allow us to do that and ensure we're getting as much time on task with students as long as we're in session.
What's the total number of contact days with students?
180.
180.
Okay, so that's still there. Okay.
So, Dr. Krauser, what you basically did was take out some professional days. You have 6 days that you've taken out of the calendar. Is that correct? If I'm comparing these two correctly.
Sure. We did not remove the professional days. We had scheduled, and thanks to your support when we originally adopted this, to have consistent professional developments each month. We had an early dismissal each month.
Right.
Those were removed from the calendar.
Okay.
The loss of the early dismissals was really the only major change. The big change is right before Christmas, that Monday, Tuesday, was school days. We're now using those, requesting in the proposal to be Act 80 days, which count as a student day, but allow us to recoup the loss of the pre-planned professional development, which is now, I'll say, health and safety planning and COVID-related professional development that has consumed our original plans.
You're talking about December 17th and 18th or the December 21st and 22nd?
The 21st and 22nd.
Okay, because the 17th, 18th are the midterms at the high school.
Correct.
Assuming we are somewhere around there. Okay, and then the 21st is professional. Okay,
yeah.
All right.
And the way Dr. Ellis and I communicated that is, depending on what's going on that time of the year, whenever, right before we leave for Christmas, as we heard the feedback, and I think all the board was part of that last year, we heard loud and clear the students and the value of them getting that information before that long sustainable break. So we'll incorporate those midterms before they leave for Christmas or the holiday break.
I have one question of clarification that I think is related to a public comment. Do I understand that this document does not by itself imply whether we're in person, online, or somewhere in between? That's
correct.
A separate issue, and the fact that we're looking at this calendar is irrespective of that decision.
Correct. This calendar is based on school would be operating as normal.
Yeah.
Other comments? Can I have a motion?
Oh, wait. We're not, I mean, you can
Oh,
approve.
that's
it.
right. That's right. Because this is next time. All right.
We're open to that, but
No.
we don't want to push it down, So this will be an agenda item on
Okay.
next week's meeting.
All right.
And that's the superintendent's report.
Do we have any more public comment? Let's see.
No, I don't think there is.
No, it looks like no more.
There is no additional public comment now.
All right. Then, unless there's something else, I think we can be adjourned.